Hello. So my IEL site was the CCP, and our topic for our group intervention was stress relief. Um, so just to give a brief overview of how the intervention went, overall, I think that our intervention went as well as expected. Um, in terms of Cole 7 steps, we were able to complete, I would say, like 5 out of the 7 steps just because of kind of the timing of our intervention. Unfortunately, based on the time that we set, we didn't really think about how students get out of class at the end of the hour, and we put our group intervention at 11:30. Um, and so we had one student come at 11:30, and then we had a couple more students come in towards the middle of our intervention. So that's kind of why we weren't able to do all of Cole 7 steps with all of the students. But we were able to do most of them. So in the beginning, with our one student that we had, we were able to introduce ourselves and do an icebreaker and set expectations for the group and how he wanted it to go, which was nice to get to know that student. Um, and then, excuse me, as students came in, we didn't do an icebreaker, but we introduced ourselves and they introduced themselves, and kind of just went over the expectations that we had already set at the beginning of the session with them. And then started our activity, which was our different stations that we had set up. So vision boards, stress balls, and deep breathing. We didn't get to do the deep breathing techniques with all the students, but we did talk about them. Um, that was not a as popular station as we had hoped. Um, but that's okay. That's why we did have different stations that students could pick from to kind of cater to their needs. Um, how did it compare to the group that we ran with our classmates? So it was different because we didn't know the students as we knew our classmates and have had classes with them and have gotten to know them. So we didn't know the vibe as well as when we did it with our classmates. And I think we were a little bit more structured when we did it with our classmates because we were on a 20-minute time crunch, whereas this was an hour, and so we had a little bit more time to get to know students individually, whereas we kind of walked through the different stations that we had set up in the spring, but in the fall we just did them all together. So that was a little bit different, or a little bit of a difference that we had. And then we were also able to get through all of Cole's 7 steps when we did our group in the fall because, again, I think we were a little bit more structured and tight on time and made sure we wanted to hit all of those. But when we did it in the spring, because of the way our timing was and how we had students come in the middle, we just weren't able to get to all of those steps as a group. I would say we did them individually with students as we worked at the different stations with them, like asking them, like, how do you think you could use these different strategies that we're providing you guys, like if you're feeling stressed before class or during a test or things like that, kind of processing through different things with them when they were at the stations, but not necessarily processing as a group, which I think we could have done better, but just we didn't want to rush students through all of the stations to be able to hit all of our different points and like push our agenda. We really wanted to get students excited for things and let them take their time and process as they needed to. So I think that was kind of some of the differences that between the fall and the spring. Needed to identify a change you wanted to make for the community-based group and how I carried that forward. Was I able to make this change? One of the changes that I wanted to make after running the group in the fall was just trying to be really intentional with the participants that we had in our group and getting to know them. Like I said before, like we know all of our classmates that we did our intervention with in the fall. And so I feel like I wasn't intentional with trying to get to know them, also because we were on a time crunch with only 20 minutes, whereas we had an entire hour to run our group in the spring. So I was really intentional about trying to get to know the students, the participants that we had in our intervention, but also trying to not overwhelm them because there was 6 of us and only 3 of them, which could be kind of intimidating, of like 3 or 4 people asking you questions all at the same time. So I think trying to like let one of my peers take the lead on asking questions to students, or if I noticed a student was kind of just sitting by themselves asking like, hey, like how's the station going, do you like it, how is your semester going, things like that, I think was really important. And I think that was a change that I did a pretty good job making and implementing for the spring. I think through the intervention, I use pragmatic reasoning to make decisions based on the information and the situations that we were provided with. So obviously having to, run through like introductions and explaining the different stations to students as they came in was obviously not something that we planned, but that was okay. We were able to adjust and make do with what we were presented with. And so being able to make decisions and think quick on our feet was really important to fit the needs of the students that we were trying to accommodate. And also making sure we didn't rush them through, because I think when students feel rushed, that can be stressful, and we were trying to provide stress relief. So kind of making sure it was like a calming environment. We had music playing in the background, but hopefully that was not overstimulating, so it was kind of quiet, not overwhelming students with a bunch of questions, kind of reading their body language and seeing how they were responding to different things was also really important. What therapeutic modes did you notice yourself using during your intervention? During the intervention, I think I used collaborating mode the most, because we were working with students to find out what they wanted to get out of our session and our intervention, letting them kind of guide the intervention by picking different stations. So the stress balls were a very popular station, and the deep breathing wasn't, and that was okay. That was kind of by design in our intervention, that we decided to have different stations to let students pick instead of just kind of forcing them all to do one thing, which I think was good and bad. There's pros and cons. I think the pro was letting students have that autonomy to pick what they wanted to do, and then a con, I think, was not like having enough time to come back as a group and generalize and process those things. But I think it was okay because we did only have 3 students that when we were doing the different stations, we were able to kind of build that in when we were interacting with the students, about like how we could make this the most useful to them. So yeah, letting students take the lead, letting them pick the different stations they wanted to do. They didn't have to do all the stations if they didn't want to, not forcing them to do anything, I think was a big plus about our intervention. And I think maybe in the future we could have like reworked how to make that run a little bit more smoother according to Cole's 7 steps. But maybe it's like we needed to lengthen our intervention or just move it to a different time. But I think for what we had going on, I think it ended up being really good. So reflecting on learning and change, did you notice any signs of behavior change? I did. Some signs of behavior change that I noticed during our intervention was when students came in. They were really quiet. They seemed kind of nervous. They were like keeping to themselves. Um, the student that we had in the beginning, he kind of sat down and was just kind of listening to us and looking at us with kind of like wide eyes. But then as we were like setting expectations and doing icebreakers and getting to know him a little bit more, he kind of relaxed. He was sitting in a recliner and you could kind of see like his shoulders kind of like, instead of like being really tense, he relaxed them, which was really nice. And then he got really, really chatty with us, which was great, and was telling us about his classes and his semester. And it was really cool to see him open up and get excited to tell us about uh, what he was doing, which was really cool. Um, and we had another student, she was talking to us about her major and she seemed really excited about it, which was awesome. And then she opened up to us about how she was nervous and kind of stressed about finding a internship. And so we were able to kind of problem solve like different ways she could, find different internships and things while she was making a stress ball, which was really cool. And, you know, um, Jenna was able to like make a connection for her, which was really great. And you could see kind of a little bit of relief wash over her of like, okay, things are going to be okay. Like, there's people here to help me. Um, and Julia was there too. And so, kind of bouncing ideas back and forth off of each other was really cool to see that like shift in her through our intervention. And then, like, when we were wrapping up, she was like really thankful that like she was able to get some help in something that she was feeling stressed about. So that was really nice to see. Um, and then another student that we had, he was super excited about the stress balls that he made. He was like telling us, he was like, oh, these are going to be so helpful for me during class. He like made two of them and he was super excited. So just seeing like the smiles on their face was really great, from kind of being like going from nervous to smiling and chatty was some of the behavior changes that I noticed. So overall, I think that our intervention went really well. Although we weren't able to get to all of Cole's 7 steps, I think that the steps that we were able to implement were really valuable to the students.